Alright, now it's working. Okay. Give me a second. I'm just going to get up some stream of my, like, screen going. There we go. Alright. So, welcome. This is going to be basically a little bit of a tutorial on how to make missions and generally kind of set up like a FunOp for Arma 3. So going over the basic concepts like setting up a mod list, how Arma kind of structures the profile folders, so like a couple of things outside of Arma, and then basically going over the in Arma stuff, like how to basically set it up. And I will use my Zeus FunOps as kind of an example, because I'm kind of need to work on those anyway. So I basically want to start with the sort of start of how Arma structures things and what like building a mod list actually entails. So let's just boot up Arma itself and just have a quick look at it. So Arma actually has a pretty damn good launcher, where the launcher has quite a lot of features for storing mod lists, and it's pretty straightforward to use. And this is kind of the starting point for if you're running a FunOp with like a set theme or a set like time period, or you want to do something specific. So just gonna go over this first. So if I just go load my like default mod list here, I'll get rid of the train. That was for testing. Basically Arma, when you first boot it up, will basically have no mods loaded. This is kind of what it looks like. If you have mods downloaded from the Steam Workshop, for example, or you have mods on your local computer, like mods you've made yourself, they'll be kind of down here. For example, very popular ones are like the RHS ones, or like Tifa, stuff like that is all down here in like your mod list once you've downloaded them. And from here, it's pretty simple. You can actually click on them as well. This button here, once you click on the mod, opens the Steam Workshop page on it. So if you need to go back and do some, go back to the Steam Workshop page of that particular mod, there's a handy link in the launcher itself, which is pretty handy, honestly. Obviously, so let's say you want to basically set up your own FunOp series and communicate your mod list to your players, for them to download. So first, what you want to do is basically find stuff on the Steam Workshop. That's pretty straightforward. Let's say my FunOp is going to be vanilla Arma, so nothing changed, but I want people to... We're going to play on this map. This is a new map that's got some traction on the workshop. I don't have it yet, so I'm going to go to the workshop and download it. So just subscribe, and then if we go back to the launcher, you will see hopefully very shortly it's going to pop up with a download link. Yeah, there you go. See, it's downloading down the bottom there now. And basically very shortly you'll see we can load it into a mod list. So it's kind of, we're just going to go over this kind of the basics of this side of it first, like on the desktop and in my computer and stuff like that, and then we'll move into like what you do once you're actually in the game using my Zeus mod list. I just think this is an important part that's kind of not covered that extensively. It's just like the basics of setting up a mod list for other players and exporting it, stuff like that. So it's almost done. Cool. So as that mod downloads, basically you should get a big green bar saying the mod was installed if it's a new mod. And you can also find it alphabetically in the mod list. Won't do that because I've got 47 mods, so it takes ages. But I'll just load it there. And you can see now it's in the loaded mod section. Now, let's say I want to basically save my mod list set up as like a preset. Let's add a couple more just to make sure it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to add Ace. Ace has a dependency, which is going to pop up now. Yep, so Ace needs CBA loaded to work. So you just want to load that as well. And then let's say I just want to add, like, I don't know, advanced movement. I think it's under advanced movement, or something changed. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to bother. I'll just do those two. So it should be 3, because you've got basically the map, I've got Ace, and I've got the dependency for Ace. CBA by itself doesn't really do a whole lot. I mean, that's not true. It does a lot, but it doesn't really do anything like visual. Doesn't add any vehicles. Doesn't add any like uniforms or weapons or anything like that. What it does is basically add a framework for other mods to work with. It adds a lot of key binding options. It adds a lot of like options menu stuff. It adds some really useful things like background mod stuff. I won't go too far into detail, but like things like class event handlers and stuff that aren't really in the base game. So let's go there. So that's my mod list for my FunOps. So let's say I want to save this as tutorial FunOps. So you can go up in the top right, you go to the presets, and you can save it as a new preset. And you'll see here down here, tutorial FunOps is now a preset. Now, if I want to basically send this mod list to other players so they can download the exact same mod list as me, and so our FunOps are, you know, it's consistent, the mod list across players. When you've got the mods loaded or the preset loaded, you want to go here to more, and you can export the list of mods to a file. You want to click only the loaded mods, and you basically want to give it a name. I normally do tutorial FunOps mod list, and I normally give it a version number just so I can differentiate if I've updated the mod list with new mods. And I'm just gonna put that on the desktop for now. And there we go. And what it basically does is it's going to pull it up now, but it's going to save a HTML file that basically contains the URLs of the mods on the workshop. And there you go. So you got 3, Ace, CBA, Wild Mountains. And let's close that again. And now, let's say I was someone who didn't have that mod list. I'm just going to unload these. And I'm going to delete my preset. So pretend I'm another player who doesn't have that mod list. I'm going to go import either there from the more menu, or go to presets and go import. And from there you can choose that HTML file, and it's going to save the preset as an imported preset, which you can then rename yourself. And it's got the mods that your, the FunOp runner has given to you. So it's pretty straightforward there. Ace, it'll download them automatically, and the launcher is all pretty, handles the deployment of mods pretty effectively. Wish more games had this kind of setup. Like, it would be great. But anyway, I digress, because we're not going to be using this mod list. Just make sure my depot is blank. Cool. So let's load ZresTech. Now, ZresTech is a FunOp I'm going to be running. It's not set up yet. We're not running yet, so as you can see, there's a lot more mods. It's currently at like 80, I think. Yep, 80 exactly, including CBA and Ace. But a lot more vehicle and weapon mods, a lot more Ace stuff, like a lot more weapon mods, a lot of functionality mods, and lots of sort of tweaks and AI mods and additional maps and stuff like that. Additional gear, some even like some cloud mods for the maps I downloaded. So that's kind of deprecated. Something's new. Yeah, you kind of need to like keep an eye on mods, because quite often you'll see stuff like updates and stuff that change the way things happen. So yeah, you just kind of want to keep an eye on stuff like that. That's something for me to obviously check. I'm just going to do this kind of live exactly how I do it for real, just so it's really clear how I operate. What does he mean by deprecated? What has happened? Sorry, just bear with me. I'm just going to quickly check something. Okay, I'm not gonna worry about that for now. That didn't used to say deprecated, so I'm not sure why that mod's deprecated now. Maybe ACE3 changed. That's fine. So this mod list is a lot more complex, but now we also want to talk a little bit about how Arma sort of saves your missions and stuff like that in the computer, because that's something you'll have to work with outside of the game as well. So I'm gonna pull up my folder here. So Arma operates on a profile system. So basically, I don't know if it's super visible here, but basically, I have my documents folder in my computer, and it goes to my Arma profiles, other profiles, because I normally operate on a alternative profile. We'll get to profiles in a second. And then I've got my Lieutenant Dozet profile, which is like my main profile or account. This is basically where it saves things like all your key bindings. It saves stuff like certain types of screenshots, like that's from a mod. It saves your saves in like campaign, and most importantly, it saves your mission folders when you play with Eden, like the in-game mission editor, which we're going to get to shortly. For example, a recent mission I worked on was testing the DozeQ mod, and that's the mission folder here. So it's got scripts, it's got like a mission description file, which basically goes over the mission title and some extra parameters like respawns and stuff like that. A lot of this you can do in Eden itself, but it's important to kind of know that you can do a lot of stuff in the folder as well. And if you're sending your mission to a server or to someone else to load or host, you will need to learn how to pack these mission folders into the file that Arma uses, which is called a Pbo. There's lots of different ways to do this. For missions, I use Pbo Manager. It's not the perfect system, but what I like about Pbo Manager is it adds this interaction in the Windows interaction right-click menu. So you've just got Pbo Manager and then pack it as a Pbo when I right-click on the folder. When I make this a YouTube video, I'll probably put a link to the Pbo Manager. But with Armaholic being taken down this last year, I don't know if Pbo Manager is still available online. No, it totally is. Never mind. Okay. I don't know if that's a safe website. I don't know. Might be worth experimenting. But the Arma Reddit obviously has a bit of a discussion about it. Pbo Project or Mike Heroes Tools Pbo Project is another really good one. I used that for when I was packing a terrain I was working on. So that's another option. But anyway, what does that mean? So basically, when you're done with your mission, which we'll get to, the actual mission side of it, you can basically pack this into a Pbo file, which then it's kind of like putting stuff in like a zip file, for example. But it's a little bit different. And then here you go, here's the mission file, all conveniently packed, and you basically put that on your server and it runs off that. The 143rd, for example, we use Faster, which is a type of like application that basically runs the server. It's like a GUI for the server, and you basically refresh the folder, put the Pbo in there, and then click launch, and it basically launches your mission. So you need to have them as PBOs for it to work. So again, we'll kind of come back to that at the end of making a mission, or at least, you know, temporarily at the end of making a mission. So I don't want to do the whole thing on stream, but yeah. Now let's load, so I've got my Zeus tech mods, let's load up Arma. So it takes a little while to boot just because it's got 80 mods loaded. And obviously it's also gonna kind of depend on your computer and stuff like that. Obviously my computer is like turning off wallpaper and doing stuff like that. And now it's loading the add-ons, which takes some time. And I'm going to turn off the display capture in a minute here and switch to the game capture just because it's more efficient for streaming. And then we're going to get into the actual making of the mission, or like how does Arma Eden work? Now you might have heard already, if you're an Arma player, you might have heard of concepts like Zeus and Eden. Zeus is like live editing. Zeus is a role inside the game that when you're playing, you can edit the mission to a limited extent, like things like spawn vehicles, place respawns, lightning bolt players, set off nukes, that sort of thing. Eden is the not live mission editor. Eden's a little bit more powerful, because obviously the mission isn't live. It's like more like a map editor, but not quite a map editor. I mean, it's best known as the mission editor. And it's basically, now, it used to be a very basic, like the map mission editors when Arma first came out didn't have the 3D functionality and stuff like that, but even now is very powerful and quite convenient because it's all 3D GUI. Like what you see is what you get, kind of placing objects and buildings and triggers and stuff like that. So sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. Just seemed like I'm suffering some weird technical issues with my streaming software. It's kind of annoying. Also seems kind of laggy for some reason. Okay. Never mind. Anyway. So yeah, moving on to the in Arma side of things. So here we have like the main menu when you launch Arma. Basically, one of the first things you want to do is go to your profiles. This is basically where all that information I was talking about earlier in your documents folder is stored, based on these profiles. So Shin Itagaki is my main one. This obviously has my, player name, sort of default settings, default unit stuff. And a lot of these options, like your controls and your settings, can be tied to profiles. So make sure you're on the right profile when you basically want to play. But let's move on to the editor. Now, on the main menu, if you don't see the editor here on the sort of like splash screen part, if you go to single player and then down the bottom is the editor. And first it'll ask you to choose a map. Obviously a lot of maps are bundled with Arma. By default, you should have Altus, Malden, Stratus. If you buy Apex, you get Tanoa. And if you buy Contact, you get Livonia. And then obviously any maps you have from... Oh, I think you also get Virtual Reality by default. But Virtual Reality is basically a flat plane with nothing in it. And like no skybox, or like very basic skybox. It's good for testing stuff because it loads very quick. Obviously I've got some mods loaded, so I also have, sorry for the horrible pronunciation, but I've also got Maxinimi, I don't know, and Tria. I want to start my players and my FunOp on Tria for the first mission, or at least the first couple of missions, so I'm going to be building the start of the FunOp sort of here, and it's going to serve kind of as like the base players load into, bit of a training ground, and like the first few missions of the campaign. So obviously that's the map I'm going to be working on, and you basically go into the editor now. Now, when you're faced with the editor, when you first load in, it's probably worth getting your bearings a little bit. So if you press M to bring up the map, it brings up your map like normal. Obviously this little icon here is the camera, which is basically you in the editor. And you can right click on the map and move the camera around. Or you can physically, move the camera around like you do with playing. WASD by default will be, forward, backwards, left and right. Q and E, Q is up, like vertical movement, and Z is down, like, vertical movement, so it helps if you need to get like low. The right mouse button will obviously pan the camera. So for example, if you need to just like rotate around an object, you can use like, right now I'm holding D and holding right mouse button and moving around this tree stump. Or holding, A and right mouse button to move the other way. Or, looking down by holding Q and looking down. Left mouse button will drag and select and do things like that. And middle mouse button, normally used to move the camera around, but I've got a bit of a problem with this. Doesn't seem to be working. Now, things you will notice straight away is on the left here, we have this big entities box. If you need to hide this box at all, there's a little arrow here. This is basically everything that's currently placed on the map. So things like vehicles, people, triggers, mission parameter stuff. That's all placeable on the map through this menu. This basically just says things that are currently placed. And then this right menu is basically things you can place. I'll go over this in more detail shortly because that's obviously a pretty important menu, but for now we're just going to close those and just sort of move around the map a bit. I want my players to kind of be over here at the start at the heliport, I think it was. Actually, let me just have a quick look at the barracks as well. My menus seem to be quite laggy at the moment. It's probably just I'm streaming. Okay, no, the heliport's better for what I want. I think it was this way. Just gonna follow the road manually. Yeah, here we go. So I kind of want to set up my players initially in this hangar over here. So I'm going to be doing a lot of this tutorial from like this part of the map. Now, obviously you can see now that my camera has moved to the heliport if you ever get lost on a map. So this map's quite samey in particular because it's all swampy and trees. Now up at the top, you basically have, like most sort of production software, you have lots of different categories of tools. Things like, you know, save as, exporting, things like, you know, view changes, edit attributes, blah, blah, blah. The play menu has a lot of testing options, like testing your mission in single player or setting up like a little multiplayer server to test it. You don't want to really host it from here, I don't think, for actually running your mission, but it's good for testing if things are working as they should. But let's kind of go over them. So let's say I want to set this up. First I want to save it just because I like to save things straight away. By default, Arma will have two categories in your save as menu. It'll have missions and multiplayer missions. That's what the MP stands for. I would recommend, I don't know what it actually does. I'm not that experienced with Arma to know what happens if you build a multiplayer mission in the standard folder. But I always put mine in multiplayer missions just because they're designed for multiplayer. And I don't know if that affects it, but if it does, this will avoid it. I'm going to call this Experience Tech. Or just call this training. I like to do a version number as well because I go through lots of different iterations and it just helps me keep track of which version is the latest. So that mission's now saved. And it'll appear in my documents folder under my profile for mission packing reasons later. Now let's talk a little bit about the attributes menu because it's another one that I use quite a lot. If you go to general, this is stuff like what's kind of presented to the players before they get into the mission. So I like to call my mission, as far as the in-game logic works out, the same thing as what I saved it as. So I'll call it that. I'm the author, so I'm going to leave that the same. If you want to put a path to an image file and have like a custom loading screen, you can do all that. You could put down what DLC are required, but I don't bother. People either have the DLC I want them to have or they don't in our unit. So I'll just say something like the Zeus tech. This is just a placeholder for the tutorial, but meets up and prepares for combat exercises. It's kind of like a little teaser text. I just put like something basic. I don't really spend too much time on that. I think FunOp is more important. Something that's quite interesting you can do here is you can change the allegiance of the Green 4 faction. If you've played much Arma, you know that there's several different factions in game. So things like NATO are under Blue 4, meaning like Blue 4 factions, which can normally be like NATO, Western Europe, that sort of thing. Whereas Op 4 is quite often things like, I mean, in the base game, it's basically like NATO is Blue 4, CSAT is Red, Op 4, things like that. And then Independence is the Green faction, so stuff like the AAF. And they can be basically friends or enemies with either side of Blue 4 or Op 4. And you can basically change that here. You can make them friends with both factions. You can make them enemies with both factions. Or you can make them like friends with Blue 4 and enemies with Op 4, which I think is the default. So by default, that's how it'll be set up, but you can change that. A lot of these settings here, I don't normally edit in this menu. I normally edit it through the mission settings file. So we're not going to cover that too much, but there's stuff like, if you hover over objects, you'll get a bit of a tooltip of what things do. So it's worth having a look through some of these. Like the states, which has like, if you're making a single player mission for like the Steam Workshop, that's quite different. Like you will probably want things like briefings and all that sort of shit. But I don't really use that system. I normally use an in-op like voice debrief, like literally talking to my players. But it's got some cool features like airdrops, ambient flybys, like proper detailed text briefings for the map. Like when you press M, there's a bunch of like briefing menus when you're in the game. But let's not worry too much about all that. It's also got like single player respawn settings. Again, if you're making like a single player story mission or something. But again, I don't use this menu much apart from the first top part, like literally the name of the mission, the author, maybe a picture, and a basic text overview. And even then, I do a lot of this in the actual description file too, which we'll get to later. Another important aspect of the attributes menu is the environment. This is where you choose things like time, day, and weather. If you're making a night op, obviously this is crucial. If you change the time there, it'll change the time in the mission. Or at least the start time. Time does move in the missions, but this is setting up the start time. It's pretty easy to use. It's just, there's a slider here, or you can manually edit the time. Like, I want to start at 6 AM. Yeah, you can just edit this manually. And let's say I want to set it as, like, a certain year. We can do it as, like, something like that. Let's say it's today the 26th. So it's just, we'll just do today, but 1996. 6 AM, and let's say I want to make it a little bit more overcast. Basically, the star is like what it's projected to, what it looks like now, and then the forecast is like where the mission will slowly move to during the course of the mission. So if you want it to stay the complete same through the mission, you'd just keep it the same. If you want to make it worse over the time, you'd make it higher, and if you want to make it get better, you'd make it lower. So let's say I just want it static. Fog, obviously that's pretty visual. Fog, a lot of players can get quite annoyed at if visibility is really low. But it is quite immersive, but you just want to be careful with over-liberal use of fog. Something like up to maybe 40% is probably reasonable. 75 is not. Like, in my opinion, that's like almost too much. For a short period of time, maybe it's fine, but yeah. I like to keep it relatively low. Same thing, you can have it so the mission will, change the forecast and stuff like that. Stuff like rain, you can manually override the forecast, doing it kind of naturally, and just set up rain to be on. Same with lightning, waves, if you've got lots of water on your map, like the sea. This is more sort of prevalent on maps like Tanoa or Altus, or Stratus. Wind, which will basically just affect tree movement. If you look at the background over to the right there, you'll probably see the trees move a bit more. They've turned up the wind. So yeah, that's basically all that this menu does, is like time, day, and weather. If you want time to move faster on your mission, you can change this multiplier. But I like to use just like 1x, so I just cancelled it. Whoops. The multiplayer menu is where you set up a lot of the multiplayer settings. So like most of my missions I set up as cooperative with 99 slots. Now this is kind of an important distinction. You want to turn, unless you want multiplayer slots, if they're not filled by a player, to become AI. Like basically, let's say you're making a 5-man team and you want players to join as like the sergeant, and then you want the rest of the slots filled by AI, you would leave this ticked. But I don't. I basically want my slots, if they're empty and they don't have players, they're empty and don't spawn. So I normally untick that. Summary is just a scenario lobby message. I normally just paste exactly the same from the overview. Go back to multiplayer, save it in there. I normally enable respawns, because that's annoying if you don't. And I normally set it up as respawn on custom position. Obviously, you can set this up differently, depending on how you want to run your mission. But I like to do a custom position. I like to turn off show counter. I like to, so players can choose their position if there's multiple respawns, so I turn that on, and I leave the rest kind of empty, and then I change the respawn delay to normally about 5 seconds. It's kind of what most people from the 140-30 used to. You can obviously experiment with the stuff and do your own thing, but that's what I'm setting it up as. I don't use the save loadout system in here, like the base Arma one. I use the setting in Ace settings for respawns. So we'll come to that when we come to setting up your settings menu. But I leave that unticked in here, but I'll get to Y a bit later. Obviously, if you're using base vanilla medical, there's some settings here. Again, we use Ace medical, so we're not going to be really touching on that much today. But the settings are all here if you want to do it. It's pretty straightforward, and the menus, if you hover over them again, there's pretty good tooltips that make it clear what each setting does. Finally, the last one is performance, but again, I just leave that kind of vanilla. Dynamic simulation basically affects like physics and AI and stuff like that. I don't like to fuck with it too much, just because it's already complicated enough without playing with the settings to try and like troubleshoot. So I kind of just leave that default. Now, the settings menu is a little bit different. This is more like, you know, your standard Arma video settings, your standard Arma controls, and like your standard Arma audio options and stuff like that. But there's an important new setting here that you might not have played with much if you're just a player. If you haven't really been playing much with missions, you probably haven't really played with the add-on options all that much. Add-on options are basically where you set up all your modded settings. And as you can see from the drop down, there is quite a lot in my mod list. This really determines how your FunOp kind of plays and adds a lot of functionality and a lot of extra work. But it's quite rewarding. There's 3 categories at the top for add-on options. Basically, server-side settings, which can override the clients in the mission. This is like what the server is set up as. Mission, if you want to basically just have it mission-specific. I quite often do it in the server, but you could do it in the mission. And then client is like, you know, if the player themselves want to change like their DUI, like radar settings, for example. So client is like the player themselves. So for example, if you want to change settings and you don't want the players to have control over it, you want to overwrite the clients. So no matter what they've got set in their setting menus, this overwrites it basically. Which can be good for some things. Like if you've got server settings that affect everyone, you kind of want to overwrite the clients in the mission. But if it's something like DUI where it's kind of down to like personal preference, like what colors people use, I don't know if you want to overwrite that stuff, because that's kind of more for them to decide. So some of these menus I won't even touch. Like let's look at DUI. That's a good example. It's like a little radar mod that appears down the bottom of the screen. All these settings, right, like what they want to set up, I don't want to overwrite the clients. Like if they want to change these settings to have better range, or like change how the icons work or the colors and stuff like that, or like what radar type they use, I'm gonna leave that alone. That's up for the players to decide. The stuff I am gonna touch is like the Ace settings. So back to that point earlier about Ace respawn. The reason I didn't tick respawn in the mission, like the Arma default settings, is because Ace has a respawn module here, and it saves the loadout gear, and it removes bodies after they disconnect. And I do like those settings, and I want them to be on. And if you look at it right now, they overwrite the clients and the mission. And also, if you hover over this tick, you can see that the setting is applied. Like what that basically means is the setting is in effect right now. For a different look at it, just gonna try and find a setting that's not applying currently. Yeah, here we go. Let's go to the mission version instead. Now, currently in the mission version of Ace Respawn, those settings aren't applied. That's because the server's already overriding them. So the save gear is already being overridden by the server, which in the server version it is turned on, and in the server version of remove bodies, it's already turned on with the exact same setting, like they're both on. Hence why you get an orange cross rather than a red cross. So that's the difference. This is probably going a little bit too complex for the scope of this video, or the stream, but generally, you want to fiddle around with these settings quite a lot if you're setting up a new campaign. and you want to save and load them like from presets. So in the past, for like my Marsoc missions, for example, I basically saved all my settings as like a preset. So if something went wrong or I needed to quickly just like load them, I could just like load them from that. And I'll be doing the same for these missions. And I normally go through them like one by one. So one I quite like to often check is stuff like cook off. It's just like, I normally just like it turned off effectively. Might change some settings there. Stuff like that. Another one is like G-forces for pilots. It's quite a common one. Stuff like hearing and combat deafness and armor with Ace is kind of annoying unless you like it. I don't like it. I think it's just pointless. It's just a bit annoying. So some of the settings here are good for getting rid of stuff like that. Respawns, medical. Ace medical is pretty complex. It's got a lot of settings. Like how bandages work and how like splints work and blood and all that. If you played Arma with Ace medical, obviously you'll know there's lots of different ways it can kind of work. I mean, you can make it so you can only stitch people inside of it, like near a vehicle, or you can make it so only medics can do blood, which is like the default Arma. I'm sorry, the default 143rd way of doing it, where basically medics can stitch and give blood, and everyone else can only, you know, use bandages and stuff like that. You've got obviously different, you know, color settings for how it looks, stuff like that. Night vision, another one. You can change kind of how the night vision looks. Overheating, like weapon jams and stuff like that. It's kind of annoying, so I like to turn a lot of that off, or at least like reduce the effect of it. And this obviously this drop down menu has a lot of options because Ace is pretty broad in what you can do with Ace. Hence why a lot of units use it. It's got a lot of extra features and functionality. Stuff like TFAR as well. TFAR is obviously the big radio mod that everyone, like a lot of people use. I don't like to fuck with TFAR too much, just because TFAR by default has pretty good settings. And like the channel name and password is how it interacts with TeamSpeak, so you don't really want to play with that at all. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward once you get the hang of it. But a lot of it can be kind of obnoxiously complicated when you're first learning. So feel free to ask me questions, or I guess like DM people that have done it and be like, how do I make that work? Like, is that a setting or is there something different? So anyway, let's go away from this because I'll set that up in my own time. But let's sort of talk more about the, yeah, so we've basically gone through attributes. Tools is quite complex. Adds a lot of really useful shit that I quite like later. But for new people to FunOp mission making, you probably don't need to use a lot of it. But I quite like using it. I mean, for screenshots, the camera is incredibly useful. If you want to make like really cool armor screenshots, you'll pretty much, yeah, need to learn the camera, or at least mods like the camera. But most of the tools, I use Polpox as like animation viewer for doing like screenshot photo ops. So that's like a tool that normally appears in here. It's much like the animation viewer. Quickly load up the default Arma version just to sort of show you. It just kind of, you know, if you're looking for a particular like animation for players, you can kind of get a bit of a preview here. But this one, the vanilla Arma one's kind of annoying. So I use Polpox's one because it's a lot easier to find. Like, let's say you want a salute animation, it's a lot easier to find it in that than in here. But anyway, that's going off topic a little bit. Play, obviously, if you want to test your mission like a multiplayer, I do it in here and just host it on like a LAN network. And that'll basically boot up this mission as it is. But right now, nothing will work because we don't really have any player characters. We don't really have anything down in the mission. So let's talk about the most important menu, which is this one. I guess you'd call it like the entity menu. Again, if you don't see that menu, there's normally a little button up here that'll open it. So yeah. Now, it's organized in several different categories. We're going to basically ignore history and favorites and stuff like that for now. We're just going to look at assets. Now, along the top, tied to your F keys on your keyboard, is basically objects, compositions, triggers, waypoints, systems, and markers. So left to right, objects is basically individual objects like people. So here's a NATO ammo bearer, just a dude. It's things like, vehicles. So it's one boat. It's things like if you want to put down like buildings, but it's basically single versions of those things. Yeah. And let's put a wreckage down as well. Can make missions quite a lot more thematic and interesting if you add objects to it. And to be honest, if you don't have any objects down, your mission won't work. Also, you can select things with the left mouse button, and if you just press delete, it'll delete them. So, pretty easy. Compositions is the second menu. This is the same sort of thing, but groups, meaning like squads, platoons, compositions of things. What a composition is like a group of things. So, for example, I've got a really odd composition here I've made called Corner Cage, which is just, like two fences together. More complicated one is the one we use for our unit, which is like the 143rd one. Probably won't work in this mod list because it's designed around 40k mods, but yeah. Stuff like I was working on some canal plinths, so I kind of bundled them into compositions of models. Stuff like this sort of thing, like groups of objects basically. The base game ones are more like, squads. So let's say you put down like a MLRS section, it's basically two of those artillery pieces. So putting down squads is kind of a good way of looking at it. Triggers are a bit more esoteric. Triggers are like setting up things like objectives and scripting to fire when a player enters like an area. Again, probably outside of the scope of this a little bit. But for example, you can make like an area trigger by, every object in the game has an attributes menu, which you can either right click, go to attributes, or double click it. And this pulls up this thing, which is context sensitive. It depends on what you double click on, what options you'll have. For triggers, I'm setting up the size of the object. I'm going to make it an ellipse, and you'll see quickly it's now a 100-meter circle. Let's make it a little bit lower, so I can change the vertical height of it. Let's say like 10 meters. These are all meters, by the way. And now it's a weird flat cylinder. This can do things like when someone from Blue 4 is inside the circle, something happens, but we won't cover that in detail here. I've used it for like mission objectives before, where someone enters an area and like a little mission sound plays. I don't know if I've got that saved in here. Probably not. No, but I do have some custom radio channels set up as a composition. But anyway, I digress. Triggers, save for when you're a little bit more experienced, I think, or look into it on like Google, or like there's lots of YouTube videos that explain how to use triggers. Waypoints are like if you want AI to do something when your mission starts, like if you want a patrol, let's say you want like a patrol of units to do something, you could have like some guards of the base. Let's just build a quick example. Let's say I want just like a Recon Patrol to go down this runway at the start of the mission. So I'll select that unit. I'll go a move order under waypoints, and at the start of the mission, that patrol is going to walk to the other end of the runway. I don't really use these because in mission I normally place my enemies and stuff like and allies down in the mission using Zeus rather than this editor. So again, there's lots of different ways these work, and you might want to use them, but I personally don't, so I'm not really going to cover it. Systems. Now, this is another important one. This is a big one we do use a lot. This is where you have all the stuff that's a little bit more esoteric and like not in the mission as an object as such, but as like a thing that affects how the mission works. this is stuff like if you want to add Zeus to your mission. Like this module I just put down adds a Zeus module, but it doesn't, like, you can't see this in the mission. If like you're playing, like if you play as a soldier and look at the ground, this is not visible. It's a module. And you can determine who will be like your Zeus by setting an owner. So let's say I call this Zeus boy, and I've set it up so the Zeus boy has access to mod content as well by changing that to including unofficial ones. If you have just official add-ons selected, the Zeus won't have access to your mods. Like if you have modded vehicles, for example, they won't be able to use them. So you want to change that. So I've set it up as Zeus boy as the owner. Now this can be set up a couple of different ways. You can tie it to like someone's Steam UID. You can set it up as like someone logged in as admin on the mission. Easiest way though is to set it up as a variable name, which is what I've done here. Is I've basically called it Zeus boy, and I'm gonna make whoever loads into a slot the Zeus. So I'm gonna pick a character here. Let's just make it like an officer. The veteran parade dress. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna double click on this guy. This opens up like the unit's variable menu or the attributes menu. Obviously there's a lot of options here, so we're not going to talk about those too much right now because it's probably just a bit too much of an overload. But I'm going to call this guy's variable name Zeus boy. It has to be unique, but because if I hover over him it says Zeus boy, and if I hover over this and go into here Zeus boy, because those match, this slot is now, if you load into that slot, you'll have access to Zeus. Now, right now, this character, the Zeus boy, is set up as a single player entity. So, like, this is the player if you're playing a single player mission. Which is fine if you just want to make a mission for yourself or for someone to play just by themselves. But for multiplayer and, like, 143rd missions in particular, we want to turn that off. But we do want it to be playable by a human, so we change it to playable. Now, role description, this is what appears in the lobby as the slot. If you played 143rd Ops, this is stuff like, guardsman in 1-2, for example. I'm going to call this the Zeus, and I'm going to give him a category, Zeus and the Zeuses. We'll call him Zeus 1. And the add symbol, you'll see in a second what this actually looks like, but the add symbol won't be present. But now you'll notice it's a little blue icon that's surrounded by like a purple ring at the bottom of his feet. That means it's basically a playable slot, versus this one, which is a single player slot. Or if I turn that off entirely and leave it unplayable, that's just an AI. So basically this squad would be the Zeus one, who's a player, and this character who's not. Who's just like an AI that follows you around. And that blue line represents that they're in the same squad. Like, the AI will follow this player. I can turn that off. I can hold control and drag it away. Now he's his own man. He's his own entity. His AI will still work, so like if enemies turn up, he'll still shoot at them. He'll still respond to fire, take cover, blah, blah, blah. But he won't like follow me or get into vehicles with me without prompting. But I'm just going to put him in my squad for now. So now if I go and test this as it is, like literally just a Zeus module, the officer, and the AI, and go to play and multiplayer, and go OK. What we'll see very quickly is I've set it up as a multiplayer server, and it does host a quick little multiplayer server in the background. But see, we've got the slot we set up as Zeus 1, and we have the category it puts it in as the Zeuses, which is what that @ symbol was. And now it's a slot in blue 4 that I can click on and take and play as that slot. So if I go OK, it's going to load the map, and you can see there the stuff I put in the attributes menu under general. It appears on the loading screen. So it's got it as X-Res Tech Training V1 by Dozet, and it's got the description that meets up and prepares for combat exercises part under that. So it doesn't add a lot, but yeah. Normally you'll start with like a map screen, unless you've got different settings, and then you go continue, and you'll be in the mission. No, you won't, because I've got respawn disabled. Oh no, there we go. It's going to be a bit weird. Okay. I have fucked up. So we have to put down a respawn for it to work because of my A settings and the settings I've chosen. But that's simple enough. Let's do that. So how do we do that? It's going to be under the systems menu, and it's going to be under multiplayer. So under multiplayer, there's a thing called respawn position. I'm gonna put it like, I want it to be like here. And I want it to face. But by the way, if you select an object, you want to rotate it, you hold shift and drag, and you should get this little arrow. And yeah, stuff like this, you can see it a bit more visually, because you can't rotate like the modules. They don't really have any like frame of reference. But the obviously like vehicles and players and stuff do. So we've got a respawn position now. We double click on it to go to the attributes menu. I want it to be infantry, not a vehicle respawn. And I want it to be for Blue Force specifically, not for whoever's leading in the points, or the other factions. And I want it to be, I'll leave those settings as they are. Again, you can kind of hover over settings to see what they do. Now if I try that again, it should work this time. A lot of mission making is trial and error or learning from other players, because a lot of it's kind of complex and weirdly esoteric, hence why I'm making the stream. Just gonna have a quick sip of my coffee because my throat is getting a bit sore. So we've got our map. Click continue. This time, now we've got a respawn position to load in on. And lo and behold, we're in the game, and I'm a player. And here we have our boy, who will follow me around, because he's tied to me in my squad. If you look down at the bottom, you see Henry Jackson, our boy Henry Jackson. It's got a sweet gas mask. Now because I also made this player slot the Zeus, if I press Y, I get the Zeus menu, which looks very similar. The main difference is this is live. Like, so it looks quite similar, and it's got some limitations, but generally anything you can do in Eden, most things you can do in Zeus as well. With some exceptions, there's actually some extra features in Zeus that aren't in Eden, and vice versa. Like fire support, you can spawn in like a mortar. Let's put that over there actually. So you can simulate artillery if you don't want to have actual artillery done by someone or by AI. You know, you can spawn it in, which is quite handy for simulating, you know, artillery strikes on the players. What I'm doing here is I'm holding control to put down multiple of the same module. There you go, it's like, look, a mortar strike, blah blah blah. Henry Jackson just sort of stares. Let's say I want Henry Jackson to fight someone, just to test it. You know, you can go to the Op 4 menu, instead of Blue 4, you can find an individual player. I'm just going to put down an enemy here, and that AI will kick in very briefly. Knocked me out. I'm going to heal myself using Zeus. And also Zeus can do stuff like remote control units. So I've just gone into fucking Henry's body right now to deal with the threat, and then I can release it as well and go back to the Zeus menu. And then if I let go of the Zeus menu, I'll be back in as my player. So Zeus is pretty powerful. It's pretty useful for running missions on the fly, but we're talking more about kind of the editor today. So everything's kind of working as intended right now. So let's go back to the editor. Press escape. You have an abort button, and if you've set up the mission in the editor, when you go back, you'll be back in the Eden editor rather than like back to the main menu. So that from that basic setup, like just 4 things, we basically got Zeus, the respawn, the player slot as a Zeus, and an AI. We can do quite a lot with that once we get into the mission as Zeus. For more complex setups, you might want to, you know, like let's say you want to make a bunch of slots of people. I used to run a Marsoc series, so I think I'd like normally start with this as like the starting point, and I'd get really kind of detailed with the naming. So I'd be like, I want this to be like an element leader as the slot at MSOC1. And because you can name all this yourself, you really can play with it and make it your own. Like what you want your squads to be called, what you want slots to be called. It's really quite fun once you get the hang of it. And you can call this second in command. You don't need to name, you don't need to use the @ symbol on every single member of a squad, by the way. You can just do the squad leader, and the rest of the slots will all be in that category anyway. Because if you look at these blue lines, and if you look at the entity menu that we talked about earlier, they're all part of that squad already, with this guy at the top of the list, the element leader. Yeah, so let's go, let's call the slot I don't know, Dave. And then if we basically go back into the player menu, this guy currently isn't a slot for the player. We'll just make them all player slots. You can also edit the attributes menu in bulk. So I could just go like this and make them all playable, for example. Or it might not work actually. But yeah, you can do stuff like that. Playable. And I'm going to change the respawn, so instead of just saying some random location, I'm going to make it say HQ. So again, just double click on there, or right click, go to attributes, and you can give it a name. Let's save and test that again. And you should see pretty immediately there's no slots. So we've got Zeus slot that we talked about earlier, and then we've got MSOT1, we've got the element leader, second in command, Dave, and then just the default slots. And you can basically go between those and play as them. But obviously these slots won't have Zeus access because I didn't give them a variable name, like we talked about earlier. So that's kind of how that system works. Again, you really kind of have to play with it. It's kind of complex and annoying, and I don't think this video will really explain perfectly how to do it. I think you kind of have to just like play with it, trial and error, and be like, why isn't this working? Ask people questions, come back to the video and go like verbatim, how did he do it? For example, let's say I want to put down, you know, what do I want to accomplish? I want to have this AI and this guy go for a drive, and I want them to have a car. Let's say just like one of the default like Daggers with no weapon. So I go into single objects, go into blue 4, find the Polaris Dagger, put it down, and you'll notice, oh no, the vehicle comes with AI, but I want to drive it myself. And I want it to face this way. So I hold shift, I can rotate it, but I don't want the AI. Luckily Arma thought of that. Either you can place the vehicle without crew down the bottom here. There's a little tick box. You can untick that in the bottom right. And put down the vehicle again, and it won't have crew, it'll just be like an empty vehicle. Or you can, if you put down with crew, you see this little driver icon? You can mouse over that, you can drag that out, so the guy's not in the vehicle anymore, and you can then delete him. And now back again, it's an empty vehicle. But let's say I want to start with my guy in the vehicle. You know, you can go like that. Now automatically it'll fill it from the driver to the gunner to the passengers, like by default. But let's say I'll get rid of him and I want to be the driver first, but I also want, you know, my boy in the car. So I drag myself in first, then I drag this guy in, and he'll take the, you know, the second slot by default. And then you have it. Now when you load into the mission, we'll still respawn there, but oh, maybe not. Let's just test it. Just intrigued to see like where we spawned, because this is kind of determined by like, the ACE respawn settings a little bit and what you've got in your mission file. But as you can see now, it's renamed to HQ rather than just like generic respawn. Okay, I didn't spell it on the vehicle, but Henry did. Yeah, again, that's down to sort of my respawn settings. But you can now get in the vehicle, and Henry will just kind of vibe in the back. Be perfectly happy doing so. Yeah, so if you want to set up missions that are a bit more like mechanized, or, you know, you have aircraft and stuff like that, you can place them all down for your players to have access to. Now, let's talk a little bit about the different categories of factions now. So we talked about objects, compositions, triggers, waypoints, and systems. Obviously, systems is a lot of options, so you kind of need to, you know, play with those and have a look at what they do and look them up online, because it depends on your mod list as well. But let's talk about the factions. So let's say we're just on single objects. You basically have blue 4, so stuff like NATO and your blue 4 factions from your mods. I have RHS, so I've got a lot of US forces, which are split up into lots of different categories, like Desert Army, Woodland Army. It's just kind of like a reskin. It's like, you know, Woodland camo versus, you know, Desert camo. It's not rocket science. It's just kind of like different variations of the same vehicles and gear. Now you've also got Op4. So this is the factions that are like determined to be Op4. So you can still make these player slots. Like if you want to play as CSAT or you want to play as like Russia, for example, if you've got RHS, you can totally make these the player slots. They're just going to be opposed to Blue 4. There are ways to make it work so they're not opposed using like mods and like scripts and stuff like that. But generally Arma operates on a blue guys versus red guys with green kind of bit of both. So generally you kind of want to pick a side and have your enemies be the opposite side. From there, you've got independent, which can be both sides. And again, independent stuff like in the base game is like the AAF, which I think changed sides a few times. Or, you know, can be allied or enemies. And you've got stuff like in RHS, you've got stuff like, you know, UN peacekeepers, like relatively neutral sides. From here, you've got civilian. Now, this is stuff that, like, is obviously civilian, so it doesn't fit into, you know, it's stuff like, you know, civilian vehicles that aren't, like, military vehicles. Or it could be, like, you know, just people, like beggars, construction workers, that sort of thing. This is good if you want to add, like, ambience to cities, or you want to have players, you know, players a non-combat role. Or you want to make your Zeus, you know, start off as on the purple team. Generally, blue, red, and green won't fight purple. Purple is typically, you know, civilians. Their AI kind of works generally by running away and taking cover. Again, there's ways around that if you want to have certain mission settings. But generally, they're, like, non-combatants. Stuff like IDAP, which is, like, the kind of Doctors Without Borders proxy. Factions like that, and vehicles that are typically not combat vehicles, so like civilian aircraft, that sort of thing is what comes under the purple category. And then the final category is not really any particular faction, it's props, which basically means objects. I normally call it objects, but it's basically stuff like buildings, power lines, weapons, wrecks, signs, you know, if you want to put down like billboards or signs, you know, this category is all like your objects that are like physical objects, but not necessarily tied to factions or anything with AI. Lots of different categories, lots of different, a lot of them are set up by faction or like map. So, for example, if you really like the Livonian churches, you can find them under Structures Livonia Religious. And you can put down whole churches and stuff like that, you know. You can really kind of build a city using just the editor. But there are performance implications, so we'll talk about that a little bit. Let's say I want to build like a little village here. You know, I'm going to really rough-ass it, just because I can't be bothered setting out properly. So we're just going to do like village, you know, couple of houses, a church, obviously, you want to probably take more time with this sort of thing and make it good. This is just me placing it down. Now, if I leave this as it is, the mission has to load in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buildings on top of whatever else you have placed, and AI, and all these 5 buildings have full physics and simulation applied to them. So, in the 143rd, we normally recommend you turn, if you're building objects in the mission, like cities or towns or fortifications or walls, like let's say you want to build like a siege mission and build up the defenses in the editor and build like a cool base or whatever, you want to normally turn a lot of the physics and stuff off so that it performs better for your players if you're hosting a multiplayer server. So how we do that is we basically go into the attributes menu and we go to what's called special states. Now simulation, we basically want to turn that off. If you turn that off, it basically stops using input and collisions, and we like to call it like turning off the physics. It doesn't turn off the physics like fully, like obviously bullets will still, you know, be stopped by walls and stuff like that, but it means like the server's not having to calculate how this object is being interacted with during the course of the mission. Now, it might not matter if you're just doing like one building, but if you have hundreds of buildings placed down, you don't do this, it can start to tank the FPS and the performance of the server in general, meaning your players will probably have a bad time. So it's worth if you're placing down hundreds of objects. Let's say I just want to make this whole village, turn it off. I would go down here, turn off simulation, and make sure that it applies to all the objects I've selected. And now, you'll see this little red icon that appears next to the object. That means simulation's turned off. Another thing that can quite often show up, I'll try and find an object that has it, is something called simple objects. I think generally windmills have it. Let's try and find that. See how we have a wind turbine, which is a very pretty animation. You know, it's physically operating. Like you can see the rotor blades turning. With this one, I can turn off the simulation and it still works. Okay, maybe that's not a good example. I'm trying to think what will have it. It's about aerial. Aerial? Antenna? Oh, that's horrible. Antenna. One of these should have simple objects. Now, simple objects is another additional option that we like to use if it's possible. Here we go. Here we go. So this aerial, we want to basically turn off the simulation. Now, some objects give you this option, which is an additional option which helps performance even more, but it only applies to some objects. Simple object, what that does is it basically makes the mission treat it like it's a map object. So instead of being like an object that you can like knock over or slap down or whatever, it's just in terms of calculations, the map thinks it's basically just part of the map. So it'll severely save performance. So simulation off if you can, and simple object on if you can. You can also do stuff like turn off damage if you don't want these buildings to be destroyable. You can toggle how doors start if you want the doors to be open or closed. Stuff like that. Again, kind of depends on your mission, but if we load in again now, we can have a look at what this actually looks like in the mission. Sorry, I'm just kind of misclicking right now. So going back into the mission, again, we've still just got our slot, like normal. This is a good way to sort of test your mission and play with stuff before you ever host it for players. You know, you want to test frequently and often and make sure things are working the way you intend to kind of run them. But like things like D&D, you kind of expect your players to maybe fuck with what you have planned a little bit as well. Quite often players will want to do their own thing and might not necessarily achieve things the way you think they will, which isn't a bad thing. It just means you have to, you know, kind of be prepared for that. So yeah, I launched in, got my nice little umbrella now, and as you can see, all these buildings look very real in-game. They'll still obviously be interactable like normal, even though I've turned off simulation. I can still, you know, go through the building like normal. Still use the doors if they've been configured correctly in the, you know, the files. And obviously this building will still provide cover for me if I get shot at. The aerial over here, and the windmill's still working, and the aerial is still, you know, viewable. It still has collision, like I can't, you know, walk through it directly. Kind of bounce around it. So, you know, those are settings. Oh, there's Henry running around. Those settings are really just for server performance. They don't really affect what your players see or interact with objects. There's some exceptions, but generally, it's always a good thing to do, and it will always save a bit of performance. Hello, Henry. Livonia buildings are quite good to use because they're all configured really well, and because it's kind of like one of the later DLCs. The Contact DLC is one of the later DLCs Bohemia worked on, so all these buildings are pretty well designed and built and look good and work and have like interiors where a lot of like the original buildings don't. Especially the buildings from like Arma 2, like in the Cup mods, for example. But generally these Livonia buildings are quite pretty. I quite like them. Yeah, and obviously you can fill these buildings with bad guys and have it, you know, make a whole mission out of just fucking around in the editor quite easily. So let's, kind of have a look at what that would look like. Should I build a very quick example to just kind of give you an idea of how you can kind of set it up for your players? I have a mod that populates the interiors, which I quite like using, called Zei, or Zei. I think it's Zeus Enhanced Interiors. What this does is pretty cool. Let's say I want to interior fill this police station. I want it to be like military gear. I click OK here. And what this mod does is it actually fills the building with more like appropriate props, like all these computers and desks and stuff like that, to make the building feel more, it's not just empty. But it saves me having to manually place all these objects in clutter to make it look legitimate, you know what I mean? Like, basically, the mod itself handles it. It only works for certain buildings, but when it does work, it's really useful. It just, like, populates it immediately. And it does cool stuff like put sandbags around it and make them look a bit more, like, fortified if you choose the military option. But you can also do the civilian option, which does, like, more like, a civilian approach. I wonder if this greenhouse will work. No. Okay, that's fine. So I've got my objects. I want to make sure they're all simple objects or turned off in terms of the simulation stuff, because there's a lot of objects now. So we just come down here, we make sure it's all the objects I have selected. Simulation is off, simple object is on. I want to turn off damage. I don't want the gunfight to damage the buildings or props at all. There we go. They're all red now, which is great. And let's say, how does this one work? Cool, okay. So I'm going to use this mod here. I normally wouldn't, but just for the example, I want to use the ZEI, the garrison mod, just to fill these buildings. For my hostile enemies, I'm going to have just some classic, like, let's just have some, like, Op 4 infantry. Just put that down, and then like that. Just gonna have some, like, insurgents, basically. And it's a bit hard to spot, but there's little red icons there now, so they've obviously filled the house with enemies from that faction, based on how many, units I put down. And it's garrisoned them, so the AI will obviously try and hold the building. And it's also put them in positions where, it's relatively smart with its position placing. So, like, that guy's manning a window rather than just staring at a wall. Arma AI, famously, can be really dumb. Now, for this scenario, I want my guy to spawn there, facing that way. I want my respawn to face that way. And I don't start with any guns, so I want to give this guy a gun. So you can actually edit loadouts in the editor as well. So you can right-click this guy and edit the loadout. Like, hover over this edit loadout and go there. Now, by default, you can normally edit them in the BI, like the standard Bohemia Interactive Virtual Arsenal. We all like to use the Ace Arsenal. It's a little bit more full-featured and a bit easier to use. So I'm going to go to the Ace Arsenal instead. You need the Ace mod for, obviously, this to work. And I'm going to give this guy a bit of a gear upgrade. Obviously, it's organized by categories. This is the same as what you see as a player. My mod list has, I'm going to give him the fucking Barbie gun. Let's give it a scope. I don't know, just a little red dot or something. That's probably fine. Fuck it, I want a suppressor. Give it some sweet giant magazines. I'm gonna give him a vest, because otherwise he's gonna get shot once and immediately die. It's not gonna look that good. It looks kind of shitty, but I'm gonna take a few more mags. Arma's pretty good at sorting magazines, so there's actually a menu for stuff for the weapons you're holding, so it doesn't get too confusing. But obviously with my mods, there's a lot of options. That's fine for now. Let's see how that looks. So basically, I've got my guy, I've got my slot, I've given him a bit more gear so he's a bit more survivable, and he's got some enemies in the buildings, and I've got an AI buddy. So if I go and play this now, like, this will work perfectly fine as like a little single player mission to basically clear some buildings. And we'll demonstrate that. That took not that long. Like, in the big scheme of things, if I wasn't trying to explain it, I think that would have taken, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And very quickly you can make some pretty cool custom missions with not a lot of work, really. Just a bit of experience and know-how. So yeah, now I've got my sweet gear. I know there's hostiles who haven't been alerted to my presence yet in these buildings. I mean, I'm not going to claim to be the most technical player, so I may just die like an idiot in a second. But we'll see. Nope. I'm going to open the door. There's some tree in here. I don't even know if there is a guy in there. It's too much tree. No, that's me. That's me placing the building on top of foliage, I think is the problem. Oh, I got him. Or maybe my AI friend did. Yeah, very quickly you can see there's lots of nice props put down because of the ZEI or ZEI mod. So it looks like a bit more like the building actually has shit in it rather than just being an empty building. And I'm probably going to get kept soon because I bet there's an AI somewhere in these buildings just waiting. Let's go to this building over here because I know this definitely had. Oh, I see you. Now, this might not be the best way to place your AI because it seems like they're not really reacting much. They're just kind of waiting and like only kind of reacting when I'm in the room with them. And even then, they're not being super smart. So, let's see how long it takes this guy. Oh, not long at all once I shot. But yeah, basically, there's lots of different ways you can do stuff in the editor. So what I like to do is actually not place any enemies at all. This boy, still alive. I like to play, the way I like to make my missions is basically build the mission, like the settings, like, you know, if you want to place any objects or vehicles and options for the player, I do that first. Then I like to basically place all the stuff for the objectives, so like a cool area like this. But I don't actually place any enemies. I like to place them in Zeus using a garrison module through Lambs. Lambs is a really good AI mod that makes the Arma AI a bit smarter, to be honest. Actually, you know what? I'll just show you the difference right now. So let's just go play multiplayer. Now you'll notice there's no enemies right now. They're all, you know, deleted. I don't have any enemies placed down in the mission, but I'm going to place them down on the fly. Let's pretend, you know, this is like a real mission that I've set up. So, I'm going to load in like normal. But there's not going to be any enemies yet, so we're going to have to place them and then garrison them in the mission with Zeus. So I don't want to be standing here when I do this, because the enemies will just start shooting at me. So I'm going to teleport myself. Now Zeus has the ability to teleport, which is quite useful for, you know, hiding yourself away from enemies when you want to do stuff. I'm also going to move my boy, because he's also blue 4 and will get shot at. Now I'm going to open up some groups. I'm going to put down some VDV. Should do like a fire team. Should do like 2 fire teams. Maybe, well, you know what? I'll do 3. I'll do 4. So they're obviously outside the building and running around doing their own thing. What I'm going to do now is do the Lambs module. So I like to use what's called where is it? Yeah, Task Garrison. So use Task Garrison. I'm going to click the leader of the group, and Lambs gives you this cool menu. Which is basically the radius things will get where they'll garrison buildings. Exit trigger is how they will exit the building if they're fired at. They will exit the building if they're hit by fire, or they won't exit at all, or they'll randomize it. So I like to do normally like fired near. So basically, if there's gunshots nearby, they'll come towards the source of those gunshots. So the AI seems a lot more reactive and smart. And I'm going to teleport the units immediately, meaning they're going to move into position straight away after I click OK, rather than run to go garrison buildings, because I don't need that to matter. Dynamic Patrol is pretty cool, but I'm not going to bother with that right now. There you go. I've clicked it, glitched out a little bit, put some guys on top of the steeple for some reason, but garrisons dudes inside the buildings. So let's do it on these guys as well. Okay, this building itself seems to have garrison points, which means that people are trying to garrison that steeple, which is kind of funny, but not that useful. So that, obviously it depends kind of a little bit on the buildings, how it works, so you want to be careful of stuff like that. And then this group as well. Cool, so I've got a bunch of dudes wanting to hang out on the steeple, and then a bunch of dudes picking the garrison points inside the buildings. Now, if I exit Zeus and look over there, we will see them on top of that steeple, I bet. Yup. So, you know, might want to... And we will see that those guys will actually react to that. The guys inside the buildings will probably come out of the buildings and come after us, because their comrades are getting shot at. If I move around here, we might see some guys, yeah, actually using a bit better AI. Like, I don't know if my guy put that smoke grenade down or they did, but... very quickly, you know, it can become a bit more of an interesting firefight. Because you've got... Arma physics, I love you, sir. But I'm waiting to see if the AI reacts to me a bit more aggressively. I do have a silencer, or a suppressor, so, yeah, that does help with Arma AI. In terms of, like, they're less likely to react to you if you have a suppressor, because, again, it dampens the sound. Arma's pretty realistic in that way, but, yeah, obviously not perfect. Oh, there we go. The guy on the roof has spotted me, and reacted a lot quicker than they probably would have if we just used the ZEI garrison. There's another guy up there. Yeah, I want to try and see what happens with these guys inside and see if they react a bit faster. Yep. Oh god, yep. See, that guy moved out of where he was garrisoned into the hallway and like was ready. Versus how they were kind of reacting before. So yeah, very quickly you can use different modules to kind of enhance the player's experience. And make it feel a bit more realistic and stuff like that. So that's why I kind of play stuff down in the mission rather than in the editor. It's just because I think the AI works a bit better with that system. And I think that's mainly how main ops are done as well. Is they like to use, you know, build all the assets in the editor and then build the actual, like, enemy force and Zeus in the mission. And that way you can also have, like, new units spawn in and come. You know, after I killed everyone in the village, you could have, like, a tank come along the road and turn up and wreak havoc and be like, oh no, I need to take cover and fight a tank. You know, you can quickly make it, like, a bit of a story, you know, very easily. So that's kind of all the how you actually place shit down and, like, make it do stuff. Obviously, that's a very nuanced topic, and there's a lot of options, and it gets very... there's a lot more you can do with this stuff. Very quickly. But now I kind of want to talk a little bit about what happens when you're done building your mission, and you're done with your settings and stuff like that. So, you know, let's say I'm done with all my settings here in the add-on options. You know, I've set up my respawns how I want them and stuff like that. How ACE works is it generates like a CBA file, or you want to have a CBA file in your mission settings. So let's go a little bit over that. Now, if I save this and exit Arma, I'm also going to save this to the clipboard because we're going to need it. So you can export your Arma settings here from the add-on options. And you'll see very quickly this looks like a giant wall of text. This is basically just like how the Arma config files want, or like the CBA settings file wants to see this data. But if we go down to ACE respawn, it's not as pretty as the GUI we were using before, but it's still the same settings. It's that we want the remove dead bodies when people disconnect to be true, and we want the respawn to save your loadout to be true as well. And you can see there in this section of the config that is set up correctly. And we want to copy this to the clipboard. So in another window, I'm just going to open up my display. Trying to think of what the best way to do this is because it keeps crashing my stream when I was doing it earlier. I don't know why. It used to work fine. That seems fine to me. Okay, so let's copy it and let's go over to Windows. Cool. Okay, so I can keep Arma open and show you what I'm doing. So if we go into the mission folder itself, so this is through documents, my, Arma 3 other profiles folder, Lieutenant Dozette, which is the profile I was making that mission on, and then into multiplayer missions. If we find the mission, obviously I've got a lot because I've been making a lot of missions for a while. What did I call this thing? Zeus Tech Training? Yeah, there we go. So this is what the mission folder looks like when you save it in Aiden. It's very basic. Just has a mission.sqm. If we look at the DoseQ testing grounds, you'll see immediately there's a bunch of other stuff. Now, for all my missions, I like to use the CBA settings, the description, and the inits, at least. If you have scripts in your mission, you might have a scripts folder. If you have, this is the logistics folder for the factory system the 143rd uses, which is R3F beta logistics, I think. But for my Zeus Tech mission, I'm just going to use these four as an example. So I'm going to copy those and put them into the Zeus Tech mission folder and just kind of edit them a little bit to show you what I'm doing. Now, I need to probably go grab that add-on folder again because I used copy paste. So let's just export that again, copy to clipboard. Now, first, you can do this in Notepad, by the way, but you can also use better software like Notepad++, or Sublime, stuff like that. But I just for this example, I'll just use Notepad because everyone has Notepad if you're using Windows. Now this CBA_settings.sqf, this is where you put those add-on option settings. You'll notice this is already populated because this is what I copy pasted from the other mission. I'm just going to Control A, Control V. So this is now the CBA settings from the mission we were working on. And if we go again back to Ace Respawn as like an example, there we've got our settings set up correctly. When people disconnect, their body will disappear, and when players respawn, their loadout is the same. Like, their loadout will save through dying and respawning, which is perfect. Now, that's just one of a sea of settings, obviously, but we know that the mission now has that codified in an SQF file. Description. This is kind of like the attributes menu we were looking at before in the game, but this is the text, like, this is the mission folder way of doing it instead of a GUI. So, the author, the mission file, like the mission name and stuff like that, you can actually do here instead of in Aiden. So let's just change that now to like Zeus Tech Training, whatever. You want to just change it within these apostrophes. Zeus Tech Training B1, and the description, you can just be like whatever you put in the earlier mission. Now this is the 143rd way of doing it because we use the mission PBO, like the mission folder, to do a lot of things. This might not apply to you or your unit or FunOps or how you want to do it, but I'm just showing you the 143rd way of doing it because this is kind of geared towards people in my unit to use for making missions. So I'd rather do it our official way and then work back from that. So yeah, this is how we do it, but you don't have to do it this way. Let's say Zeus Tech trains for combat operations or whatever. Might not be the exact wording of what I actually put in the mission version, but it doesn't really matter. Well, I'll do ... And let me copy that into the scenario menu overview as well. Down here, I leave the other stuff alone. Respawn delays and respawn timer and stuff like that you can change. I might change the respawn delay to 5 seconds, for example, instead of 10. I'll leave the cleanup. These are like cleanup settings for like removing corpses at certain delays to save server performance. So I'll kind of leave those settings alone. I'll leave the task systems alone and stuff like that. Mission supports up to 99 players. I'll leave that alone. I don't really care about that. Make sure I save. Init.sqf and Init Server.sqf. These are like initiating scripts settings folders. So this particular init.sqf, this initiates the logistics factory script and the Taru, which is like a type of helicopter reskin script we made. So that like rescripts all Taru helicopters on the fly because the way we do it, the factory system. That's neither here nor there. We don't actually need scripts for this mission, so we're just going to delete that. And the Init server is kind of similar, but this is initiating a message in the chat when players connect and disconnect from the server, which is quite useful. So we're going to leave that alone. It's quite useful to have in our missions. So let's say the mission's done, and now we've basically got all the settings set up, and we've got the description.ext file set up, and we've got our script set up or whatever. And the mission SQM is like all the stuff we did on the map in Eden itself. Now this is where we get to the stage where you want to pack it, basically. And since I have Pbo Manager, I just right click the folder, Pbo Manager, pack as a PBO, and very quickly it is now a PBO file. I don't know how visible that is. I'll open that up. Yeah, down the bottom here, I've got that mission saved as a PBO now. So I can now go put that on faster, or log into the 143rd server, or the folder we use for missions, put that PBO in place, and as long as the server is also loading the same mod list from that file we set up right at the start, and as long as the PBO is loaded on the server, you can load that mission, load into the slot as the Zeus, and run through that village killing stuff. And that's basically the flow. It's just the little details that make it either better or worse. So obviously that's not super applicable if you have your own unit and you might do things differently, and it's also not super applicable if you just want to do like a quick little mission for you and like 2 friends or something. But if you have any questions about how that works, let me know. But basically you want to, you want to basically set up a mod list off the Steam Workshop and export that so the server and your players can have it. 2, you want to basically, determine kind of what sort of story you want to tell, what map you want to do it on, and start placing objects and stuff and slots and, editing loadouts or putting down like an arsenal and mission for your players in Eden. And then 3, you kind of want to like basically pack it, set up the mission folder so it's got all the stuff working in case you're using like scripts and stuff like that. Set all that up, and then finally you want to pack it as a PBO and then host it. And now I've got it as a PBO, so I can technically actually host that in Arma, which I'll show you now. So I'm just going to delete this display capture. And we're going to go to the main menu, rather than in Eden, like the editor. And if you don't have a dedicated server like the 143rd does, this might be how you host your missions for your friends, for example, or for people from the internet. You might just go to multiplayer, server browser, host server. Let's say I'm hosting an internet server. Probably want a password. I like to use Hello Kitty. Oh. It's a tutorial. And, UPnP settings or whatever. I don't use them, so we're going to host that. Now, this setting will always load like whatever map you had loaded last in Arma. So because we had our Tria loaded last, it'll load Tria. But you can change the map here to missions you've got saved. Obviously, I've done a lot of missions on Altus, so there's lots of missions I've saved on Altus. But let's go to Tria, and there we go. There's our packed PBO. And the settings we set up in the description.ext came over to here. So we've got the summary screen, we've got Zeus Tech Training V1 by me. We've got the description that makes up for combat exercises, and if we go play, there's the slot, as if we made it. There we go, there's our description text and mission name in the loading screen. And when I load in, it's going to be exactly how I set up in the editor, basically. It's going to have a few more bells and whistles, just because we, set it up as a proper mission. We're not in the editor anymore. But effectively, I've got Zeus. I can, put down whatever I want, and go from there. Let's say I want to, go fly a fucking helicopter around with some friends. I can, put down a Black Hawk, and then I can go spawn some, hostile groups in the woods, just kind of mucking around. Let's just go squad. I use lambs, so you've got lots of extra benefits like patrols, which I quite like using. Make it dynamic patrol, it's like a tournament patrol. I'm not going over these in detail, this is more for you to kind of like experiment with, but lambs has some really cool AI modules like this, where the enemy will just kind of dynamically patrol once the AI kicks in. Like this guy's off on patrol now, and then I'm pretty sure his soldiers will follow him once he gets a set distance away. Yeah, there we go. Looks a bit weird at first, but, 5 minutes from now, it'll look pretty cool. And then I've got, back here at base, I can say to this guy, because he's in my squad, I can go... we can go reconnoiter the hostiles. And, that was done in, a matter of minutes in terms of the actual setup once the mission loaded. And this is right now, like a live internet server. Like, people could join this now if they have the mod list, and there was more slots than one. So, it's not super complicated, it's more just, like, learning and taking your time with, like, working out what things do what. But a good place to start is basically brainstorming what do you want to accomplish, like, what do you want your players to be doing, what kind of mission, like, story do you want to tell, how long do you want it to be, stuff like that. And that'll sort of influence how you use the editor to accomplish that goal, if that makes sense. So, right now, let's say I was making a reconnaissance mission for this Black Hawk. I'd say mission successful. We can now see the enemy patrols, which are all going to start shooting at us. And you could have a whole mission where basically you and your friends fly around in the Black Hawk minigunning infantry patrols in the swamp, which should be kind of cool. So yeah, if you wanted to change the time and day, you can make it a night op pretty easily in the editor, or in Zeus. You can actually do a lot of that stuff in Zeus. There's actually like a skip time module, for example. Environment? Yeah. So I want to make it night. I can just skip it to like, I don't know. Like, what's that, 9 o'clock? 9:30? There we go, now it's 9:30. Not super immersive if you do it on the fly like that. Like, it'll just change time. I think there's a skip time. I think there's one module that comes up with like a black screen, like 13 hours later. And then like, the time's changed, but I prefer to do it in Eden and have time naturally change. Like, you could use a time multiplier to make it faster if you want it to be day again quicker. But yeah, you can do a lot of things like that pretty easily. So yeah, I think that's it for the tutorial in terms of the basics. Obviously, it's not super well explained, and it's a bit, all over the place in terms of the explanation of how things work, and my workflow might be different to yours a little bit. So I'm totally open for DMs, questions. Later on, I'll probably put the 2 parts of this stream, because obviously it had some glitches, into one video and put it on YouTube. So YouTube comments, like any way you want to contact me, I'm always happy to help if you're trying to accomplish a specific thing. But yeah, it does take a bit of time, does take a bit of playing with. But if it's a skill you want to develop and it's something you want to do, like all things, it requires practice and it requires like education, teaching yourself a couple of tricks. And I've learned from some awesome people over time. So it takes time, basically. But I'm here to help, so yeah. Hope that helped. Hope that made it kind of clear what it requires in terms of like how long it kind of takes to do stuff, which is not that long once you've got the hang of it, but it takes a bit of time to get kind of your head around the menus and stuff. But yeah, hope that helps. I'm going to go over break now, so I hope you enjoyed. I will catch you later. Bye.